Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to do something a little different. We have a child's piece of furniture that I thrifted and so I decided to do a little girl's area. Aside from the tea party area, I also want to do just a little area outside of the she shack. And this is the piece that I thrifted. And I know that it's very rough. But Tammy took it outside and sanded it really well. And I think she got it smooth enough that we're going to be able to paint it. So she put 2 coats of the color buttercream on it. And it took even 3 coats in places. But it finally covered really well, and it completely changed the look of it. And again, we used the color buttercream on this, and gave it 2 coats and let it dry well. And now we're going to just do a stencil on it. We thought about doing some transfers and decided that stenciling was the way to go with this because we didn't want to take away from the kitchen look of it. And I had a stencil that we thought would go really well with it, and that stencil is the reason for the remaining part of this vignette. But right now we want to add some scrapbook paper as shelf liner. So we just found some coordinating paper, and we didn't have enough to do both shelves, so instead what we end up doing is just using this on the top shelf, and on the bottom we just painted that in a coordinating color. I think I said that wrong. We end up putting the paper on the bottom shelf and then painted this top shelf in a green that I mixed because I wanted some of the green that was in that paper. And I'm not even sure what all I mixed to get this color. I just kept mixing until I got what I wanted. So now I'm going to add this stencil to the top. And this is a set that I've had for a while. I'm going to look it up and try to find that and add that in the description. But I'm only using the top part of this stencil. And because this is a bakery stencil, that's what motivated me to add the second part of this video. And I was going to do some other items around this, and then decided that I'm going to do some items to go with this. So this is going to be for a child, and because it says bakery, then I'm going to put some baked goods on it, or some faux baked goods on it. Now, obviously, we did this piece to sell, and Tammy fell in love with it after we did it, and she decided she wanted it for her twin granddaughters. So this is going to go home with her. Now, again, we wanted to keep this simple, but I wanted something in the center of those doors because I felt like they were just way too bare. So I'm using this stencil from Dixie Belle, and I'm going to include this one in the description. And because it's a screen stencil, I have to work harder to get the color on it that I want. But I didn't mind that it turned out actually very faint, because that just added to the look, and it just looks so much better that way. So we were glad that that didn't turn out really dark. So if I had it to do again, I would purposely do that. Then once I got finished with that, then I clear coated this with some polyurethane, and then added some black handles to it. And I'm going to wait and show the reveal once I get the other items finished that are going to go with it. And again, this piece of furniture inspired me to go on Pinterest and look up some ways to make some faux baked goods. And I found a couple of little things that I wanted to do with this that I thought were just so cute. So I'm sure you can guess I'm going to make some little cupcakes to go on this. And I just thrifted a little riser that I'm just going to use to put about 4 of these cupcakes on. And so this is what I found on Pinterest. So you take up a cupcake tin and you line it with some cupcake liners, and then you fill it about half full with that expanding foam. And this is just a cheap brand that I got. I think any brand will work, but Walmart has a brand that's under $4, so that's what I got. And my husband said, I know you don't like gloves, but you really need to wear them with this one, because if you get this stuff on your hands, it absolutely will not come off. Now this, if it hadn't been so messy, would have been much funner, but I did make an awful mess, and that's nothing new because I make a mess with most things that I do. But this one was just a little messier than usual. One of the reasons was because this called for a joint compound, and I had some, I think it was called spackling, and I think it was old, and it was really watery for some reason, so I just stirred that up really well, and then it ended up being too thin, so I had to thicken it with some cornstarch. And my first couple attempts, my icing was way too thin. So that was part of the problem. And I finally got the consistency right. So half of my cupcakes will look different than the other half, but half of them will just be the way they would look if I made cupcakes. And then half of them will be prettier. But all of them end up looking very realistic. So I did mention that I put a small rock in the bottom of each of these because it needed some weight in the bottom. Otherwise, you're going to have a top-heavy cupcake. So now I am putting this foam in each of these. And again, I'm filling it about half full because it's going to really expand. And then I just went away for a couple hours and let it dry. And I thrifted this little stand, and I'm just going to paint it 2 coats of the color buttercream and then finish it off with a clear finish. And this will be what I will display the cupcakes on. Now here is where I started making mistakes. So I'm not measuring anything because the recipe that I saw didn't call for adding anything to this, and mine is very watery, so it had to have. So I just kind of kept mixing it and until I got it the thickness that I thought it needed to be. Turns out it needed to be thicker. So you need this thick enough to where it will go through your bag, because we're going to be using a cake decorating bag, but it needs to be thick enough that it doesn't lose its shape when you put it on there. So I'm adding a little paint to this, which thinned it some more even. So again, go on the thicker side. If you're wondering how thick to make yours, go on the thicker side if you're like me and you're just using what you have. And I'm just using a very cheap cake decorating bag from Walmart, and it worked perfectly fine once I got the consistency where it needed to be. So again, when I piped this on, it lost its shape, and it ended up looking like a cupcake would if I were to frost it, because I don't worry with piping my icing on. I just take a butter knife and put it on. So it's still going to look good. It's still going to look realistic. It just won't be as pretty as the ones that held their shape when they were piped on. So I put my mixture in the bag, and here is my first attempt where it just kind of fell flat after I piped it on. So here I am mixing some more and making sure that I added enough of the cornstarch for it to hold its shape better. So I just kind of mixed a little at a time until I could tell that it was going to hold its shape. Now, one thing that I think I was supposed to do on this and I didn't do is add some gloss Mod Podge in with this so that the icing wouldn't be flat. It wouldn't look flat, the sheen of it. And so what I end up doing after this dries is I just go ahead and brush some Mod Podge over the top of it, and that took care of that problem. But I think the YouTuber that I watched said that you could mix it in with this, and as you can see, this is very messy. I could have used a better technique, I'm sure, but I was just kind of playing and seeing how it turned out, and it did work. But again, I had a very big mess. Obviously, you don't want to use this piping bag for actual icing anymore, but I was able to just rinse it out and reuse it over and over for this. Now, although I loved this and the way they turned out, this is not something I'm going to be doing often to sell in the store because it's very limited. It's going to sell in that little child's area, but I probably won't sell many of them. But the next item that I'm going to be making for this, I plan on making several of these, especially through fall and even into Christmas. I think that they'll do really well for that, and actually even something that you might decorate with year-round. So I'm excited about the next item that I'm going to be doing. So here I am very carefully piping that on, and again, it's much thicker this time. So once I got it piped on there, then I'm going to sprinkle some fine iridescent glitter over the top of this. As you can see, that one worked much better, although my piping skills could use a lot of work. Now here is my iridescent glitter, and you could even use the little sprinkles that go on cupcakes if you're not worried about the sugar attracting ants or something. I just wanted to use glitter to make sure that didn't happen. And then I mixed some brown to make some chocolate icing and did the same with it. Again, I need some work on those piping skills, but it still, I felt like, turned out really well. And you could even do some cinnamon over the top of this one, and I think it would turn out well. So now that I'm showing you how I make my cherries to go on the top. Now, obviously, you could go to Hobby Lobby. They have faux cherries there, but I didn't want to go all the way to Hobby Lobby, and my Walmart, which is close, had this foam clay, and that way it's really lightweight. And I just formed it into balls and made a little indentation in the top of it. And then I'm going to make my little stems out of a piece of this floral stem. And I just kind of indented that top just a little bit, and then just worked it back into a smoother cherry by rolling it in my hands again. And now I'm just taking a little piece of this off because I wanted this color, is why I'm using this. And then I'll just take my scissors and cut all these little leaves off. It cuts off very easily because this is just plastic. And then I'll just stick the narrow part of that stem down into the top of this. And it made a cute little cherry, and then I can just paint that red and then put a shiny finish of Mod Podge over the top of it. Now this would work better if you did, if you let them dry before you stuck the little stem in the top of it. If you just made an indentation for that and then let these all dry, and then you could put them in a baggie and add a few drops of red paint and roll them around in there, and you could paint several at one time. And then when they dry, you could hot glue that little stem in. That would probably be an easier way to do it. But I was kind of getting in a hurry, and I wanted to see what one looked like finished. So now I mixed a little paint, and I used the color buttercream with just a few little drops of this yellow, because I wanted this to look like yellow cake. And in hindsight, this should have been done first before I popped my icing on. I was just excited to see how this worked. So I didn't do things in the order that they should have been, but this made it look like a yellow cake with chocolate icing. And some of them I painted brown around the icing and made them a chocolate cake. And but these just, I think, turned out really well. Even though I messed up several times and it could have been much better, it still worked out, and I was real happy with the way it turned out. Again, don't do as I do on these, because I did them way out of order. But if you squeeze all your foam in, and then let that dry, and then go ahead and paint your cake the color that you want it, and let that dry. If you're doing several of these at a time, then you can kind of do them as in an assembly line. But if you went ahead and painted your cake first, and you don't want a shiny finish on that, and then again just let that dry and then pop your icing on, then it would have been much easier than the way I did it. But again, I just finished painting these, and what you're seeing on the top there in the white is where I went over these with Mod Podge, and the Mod Podge is not completely dry yet, so that I would have a shiny finish to my frosting. And then here I am gluing my cherries on with hot glue. Again, I just think these look so much like real cupcakes. And Tammy is probably going to take these home to her grandchildren, but we're going to make sure that they're good and hard, and we're going to spray the whole thing with a clear coat so that it will protect the paper liner and everything, and it will be very obvious that they don't need to take a bite of it. But I think they just turned out so sweet, and much better than store-bought faux food that you would buy for your children. Now, this is the item that I'm so excited about. I'm going to make some little loaves of bread. And I'm going to be doing it the same way that I did the cupcakes, or with the same material actually. So I bought these little small loaf pans, disposable loaf pans, at Walmart. And that's what I'm going to be using to make these. Now, I'm going to actually make some full-size ones later also, because I think that if these look so realistic when you get them finished, that it would be a really good way to display a breadboard. So I'm going to do these little small ones, and I think during the holidays they will sell so good, especially if you give them kind of a primitive touch. So here I am. I filled these probably 2/3 of the way full. I think I went a little more than half full on these. And then it was really hard to keep the top neat, but it doesn't really matter, because although it's going to dry kind of lumpy, it's fine, because once it is dry, you can take some sandpaper and sand that smoother. So it ends up looking so much like bread. And this was just so fun to make, and so easy to make actually. So these came in a pack of 5. That's how many I made. And after making those cupcakes and making these 5 mini loaves, I had quite a bit left in my can still, so this doesn't store well. I don't think. I've heard that there's things that you can do to make it store well, but I just gave it to my husband, and he had a hole that needed to be filled outside, on the outside of the building actually, so he took it out and used the rest on that, so I didn't have to waste any. Now ideally that should cure overnight, but as you can see here, I have sanded this down. This is what it looks like to the right, and then the one to the left is one that I sanded down, and I just used some scissors and cut the biggest lumps off. It cuts off very easily. And then I took some coarse sandpaper and just sanded the top. And it didn't take much sanding to get it smooth. As you can see, it smooths it down pretty easily there. But I've already done it to this other one, and now it's ready to paint. Actually, before I paint it, now you could leave it like this and just let it be in the container. And you could even maybe add some vinegar to your pan, to the outside of your pan, and let it turn and age. But I want this out of the container. So I'm just going to smooth out these edges, and then the way I take it out of the container is I just cut a slit down the side, and then I just pull it out. And surprisingly, it comes right out. So the bottom is going to be just a little bit wonky, and I don't want that because I want it to be able to set. I'm making these to display on a breadboard, and so I just very slightly slice off the bottom with a serrated knife, and it works really well. And now, as you can see, we have a pretty realistic looking loaf of bread. We just need to paint it. So this is where I'm kind of trying to get my formula. The lady that I watched do it, she had some colors. She used apple barrel colors, and she was able to get a really good color. And but I don't have those. I just used my chalk paint and just kind of mixed it up. So I use some of the color Pine Cone and Rebel Yellow to get this color. I feel like I still have some room for improvement on my colors, but I was still really happy with how this turned out. And then on the sides, I mixed some buttercream with this color, probably about half and half, to make the lighter sides. Again, I think that there is plenty of room for improvement, and what I did when I did my shading is I just used straight pine cone, and you'll see that when I get to that, and did some shading both on the top and on the sides. But here I've mixed that half and half, and that's what color I'm going to do the sides. Maybe I actually mixed it a little bit more of the buttercream than the other color, but wouldn't have had to, I don't guess, because I did some extra shading on the sides to make sure that it looked more realistic, because although the sides are going to be a lot lighter in a loaf, you're still going to get some browning around the edges. I also didn't mention that I mixed some Mod Podge in with this, and you wouldn't have to do that because you could just clear coat it afterwards. But the lady that I saw do it, I can't remember who she was. I was watching late one night and couldn't see the TV that well, so I didn't even had my sound down also. But she was mixing hers in with it. Again, I think that these just turn out so cute when you get all your shading done on them. And so I just use the straight pine cone here, and just made my little ridges in the top. So I just drew some lines, about 3 I think, and then just kind of blended that over so that it would look more realistic. And again, I can have some more room for improvement on this. You just kind of keep working with it until you get the shading that you want. So it's going to look real precise in the beginning, and then you'll just kind of keep smoothing that over until you get it more realistic. And it actually is pretty fail proof, because if you mess up, you can always paint over it. Now you might be asking, why would I make this? And many of you won't have any interest at all in making it. But there was a couple of reasons that I wanted to make these. And one was with the holidays coming up, I think a large loaf, I'm going to do some larger ones, and I think a large loaf put on a breadboard would be really good decoration for the holidays. And if you wanted to, you could wrap some sort of string around it and put a tag on it, maybe with a verse on it that says, "Give us this day our daily bread," or something like that. And it would be good to decorate for the holidays. I actually even think that it would be pretty year-round, just set out on a breadboard, because once this is done, and especially once you get a little better at doing them, they look really realistic. And then another reason that I thought that they would make good gifts. So you could do some of these and put them in a little bag and sell them as for someone to give as a gift. So I just, as you can see, this really, doing that shading really took this up a notch. And then again, I even do some shading around the sides. But then once I have all my shading done, then I'm going to sprinkle some cornstarch on the top. Because you know how when you take your bread out, sometimes where you put your dough in the flour, it'll have some like flour sprinkles on the top. So I felt like that would make it look more realistic. And also here I am doing some extra browning around the edges of the top and the sides, because when you bake bread, realistically, it gets a little darker around the edges. So, and you could do that just as dark as you want. I know a lot of times when I get a loaf of bread, sometimes it'll be darker around the edges than others. So, again, there's just, it's hard to go wrong on these. I think they're really fun to do. Another reason that some of you might be interested in doing these is if you have young children, or in my case grandchildren, then this would make a really good gift. I think what I'll do for my 4-year-old granddaughter is make some different types of faux food to go in her little kitchen. And so I'll do some of those cupcakes, and I'll do some bread, and I'm even going to be doing some pies and stuff in a video pretty soon. So there's just a number of things you can do with these. And the food that you buy at the store, the faux food for their little kitchen, doesn't look realistic at all. And I know that that some might try to eat it, but you just let them know that they can't eat it. And once it's hard and you've clear coated it, then I don't think they'll be likely to try to take a bite of it. But here I've sprinkled that cornstarch on the top. You could also use flour. And then I just decided to sprinkle a little bit of cinnamon just for looks. So I was so happy with how this turned out. They're so fun to do, and again, I'm going to make several of these. Now, I end up doing some more browning around the edges. I felt like it needed just a little bit more, so I end up doing a little bit more browning. And I wrapped some string around some of them and put a tag on the top of them just to show some different ways that they could be displayed to sell as gifts. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.